Kent Wogamon of the Lincoln Journal-Star, who is dressed in his Bob Dylan T-shirt.
Nice.
Where'd you get that, Kent?
I got that at the Bob Dylan Center in lovely Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Where is the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Because Tulsa purchased his archives. It's associated with the University of Tulsa. It's fabulous. They're in downtown Tulsa. There's the Bob Dylan Center, which is we just watched the movie. The actual jacket that he wore when they played Newport and went electric is in a vitrine there. You can see the tambourine from Mr. Tambourine Man. And then there's lyrics and blah, blah. Next door to it in the same building is the Woody Guthrie Center, which has a bunch of Woody's artifacts and songs and they have big archives and stuff. And then down the street is Kane's Ballroom, the old classic. Bob Wills founded it, Honky Tonk. And across the street from that's Oklahoma Music Museum. And it's in the area where the Tulsa Race Massacre took place when the Wall Street. And so you could see that. And there's a museum about that. And it's right next to their minor league ballpark is right there, and restaurants and stuff. It's highly recommend a trip to Tulsa.
I would never have guessed that the Bob Dylan collection would be housed in Tulsa.
Figured it'd be in Minnesota somewhere.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, the film, of course, is a complete unknown. Nick had to change because his original pick, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, got pulled off of streaming.
Probably last Saturday was the last day that it was available.
Yeah, it's like a uniform day with all this. I
think it usually is the first of every month.
Oh, the first of the month, of course.
Yeah. That'd be my guess.
Well, I hate this world of streaming that we live in. It's hell.
Yeah, it is indeed.
Wow, Nick here for going back to VHS tape.
Nick, monster.
We can all rent our movies from Blockbuster.
I just want streaming to be what it was when it first came out. You know, when like Netflix first came out and everything was there, it's like, oh, this is awesome. This is great. And then everything started to fracture, and then people started fighting for rights, and it's gotten worse. It was better like 10 years ago.
Which would be because the people that owned all those movies are also associated with television and et cetera. And they're like, why should we let Netflix have all of this?
That's a good point.
Against them.
That's a good point.
So tell us about it, Nick.
So, a complete unknown.
But do it in Bob Dylan voice.
No. A complete... Ken, I need you to punch John in the face next time.
First of all, this was something that you accused me of doing before I'd ever done it.
Because you've done it before. That's why I accused you of it.
The last time I did Bob Dylan voice was like 30 years ago.
No, you've done it since I've been a producer on your show. You and my dad both have the same joke. Yes, you have.
I have not.
Anyway.
What's up with this movie? Yeah.
It is a biopic of the early days of Bob Dylan that also follows the early days of folk becoming more mainstream and other folk artists at the time. It follows Bob Dylan, but it also kind of follows all of them because they were all kind of in the same scene in the same area. Also Johnny Cash, which
Johnny Cash shows up.
I didn't know how close him and Johnny Cash were.
They were pen pals.
I didn't realize that, so that was cool. But yeah, it just kind of follows Bob Dylan's early days from him first arriving in New York to meeting people like Woody Guthrie and Seeger, not Bob, and
Peter
and
Seeger.
Just kind of growing up in that space during a very tumultuous, that's the word, right? Yeah. Time in U.S. history, civil rights movement, and the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War, all of that. So I liked it.
And then he plugs his guitar in.
And some people get really pissed, and some people are like, hell yeah.
Oh my.
Oh, you go.
So I went through a brief Bob Dylan phase when I was in middle school. So I knew a lot of the songs, but I didn't really get all of the songs because I was
12,
a 13-year-old boy in Iowa.
You couldn't understand it.
It wasn't because I couldn't understand it. It was just because I thought it was deep. I liked Bob Dylan for the wrong reasons. Like, it's so deep, but it was one of those I'm better than you because I listen to deep music, even though I don't understand how deep the music is.
So that's where
What
it
the music
came
is.
from.
I knew that.
Probably.
Hmm.
I still like Bob Dylan though, and now I have a respect for him and
I respect
who
that.
he is and what he did for culture and society. But I'm going to acquiesce to Kent because Kent seems to really like Bob Dylan at least a little.
Just a little.
A little.
How closely do you think this movie followed kind of the early stages of Bob Dylan and when folk kind of became more mainstream?
Well, here the short answer to a long question, or answer to a short question, or something. Okay, this would be the book on which the movie is based.
And it was Dylan Goes Electric.
The name of the book is Dylan Goes Electric by Elijah Wald. And it does indeed do almost exactly what Nick described. The book is Dylan comes to New York and what he goes through, but also the relationship with Pete Seeger, the folk people, Alan Lomax, who was, the folk, all of that. The movie biographically doesn't get everything exactly as how it happened, okay? But it's close enough. The real Dylan nitpickers were like, well, they presented these songs out of order. This one was recorded before that one. Who cares, right? And in real life, he didn't go to see Woody Guthrie like the day he got in from Minnesota. Stuff like that. But generally speaking, it's pretty accurate. There are some things in there that you wouldn't know if you don't know a little bit about Dylan. Everybody's name is the real person, with the exception of the girlfriend, the
Sylvie.
Yes, that woman's real name is Susie Rotolo, and my suspicion is, and this is just my suspicion, Dylan actually met with the director who wrote most of it, James Mangold, and gave him stuff which is for Dylan unheard of, but part of it has to do with this happened during the pandemic. So Dylan didn't have anything else to do.
Right.
And my something about it says, I think he wanted that name changed so it didn't make her try to show her real, as reflect her reality, and also not to like hurt her by name, right? So that's one thing that I think happened. The other inaccuracies, the only one that actually pulled me out of the movie, let's put it that way,
Okay,
is in the scene at Newport when they've started to, when they're playing the electric, and the woman stands up and says, "You're a Judas," right? And he said, "Play loud." Well, that didn't happen at Newport. That happened in Manchester, England, a year later. I can produce the box set and play the exact side song for you, So when that happened, that pulled me out of the movie. It wouldn't get anybody else, but when you know this,
right.
It did.
Was it distracting, Kent? Because I believe one of the other inaccuracies was he and Joan Baez hadn't become a thing during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's correct, but that didn't bother me so much because they were a thing by the March on Washington and the
next year
Lincoln Memorial, which was what, 6 months
63. Yeah.
And a year later. No, that didn't bother me as much. Because the idea there was just to show the impact of the Cuban Missile Crisis on the folk scene, so to speak.
Sure.
But other than that, I thought it was very good. And the other thing that I thought was excellent, actually, is Timothée Chalamet's performance got as close to Dylan as you're ever going to get. Dylan has, and I think part of the reason that he is remains fascinating in a way, 60 some years after his introduction, is that Dylan has always been enigmatic. He's never really given everything away. I mean, you read like his chronicles, his memoir type thing, or anything like that, or interviews, and some of it may be true, some of it may not. He's kind of a trickster, right?
Kind of a complete unknown.
Nice.
That's the name of the movie, and Chalamet caught enough of that, but they don't try to explain everything about Dylan. I think that's beautiful, right? Because I don't think you could without putting your view into it, right? Because he hasn't told you.
Apparently, he learned to play the guitar for this
and sing.
And yes, everything that is sung is him. It's not like an overtrack of the real Dylan.
Most of the actors actually sang.
And you mentioned, Kent, that this movie, the development is during COVID, and you have to imagine that probably helped Chalamet because it gave him extra time to practice and learn.
Absolutely, it did. He said it did.
Yeah,
he learned all that, and he was like, "I'm going to do this." Right? I mean, they could have used. There's all kinds of fakery they can do.
Oh, sure. But they had that wide shot early on when he is at the hospital, and you're like, oh, okay, this is him. Because normally in biopics, they'll have a lot of zoom ins and cuts to fingers, and it's like, okay, so that's a little trickery, but it was a lot of wide shots the entire movie.
And it's him.
My guess is they wanted to do that just to show, hey, by the way,
he's doing it. Yeah.
For real.
When the movie came out, he was the musical guest on Saturday Night Live.
That's right.
That's wild. Kent, what did you think of that? Given that you are a Bob Dylan head, of the time period that they chose to focus on. So I've made reference to this podcast before in this very segment, but my favorite movie podcast is called The Big Picture. And so this morning I went back and I listened to their episode from December about this, and the three hosts were all huge Bob Dylan fans. And they were like, I would have actually rather heard like 70s stuff because they thought that this time period is so well known and well-treaded territory because it's the origin story, whereas they thought the 70s would be a more interesting time period because we know less maybe about what makes him tick. I wonder what you think of that.
I'm on the opposite side of the fence here. Yeah, the 70s might have been more interesting for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for the point of the movie is to show is the origin story, so to speak, because most people really don't know that.
Yeah.
They might know that he started out as a folkie and went, quote, electric.
That's all I knew about him going into the movie.
And as you watch the movie, you learned a whole lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is a great story, right? It's a better, there's not going to be that kind of a story from the 70s, right? And I mean, the movie adds these little details or kind of alters them, but still adds them, like the chords on Like a Rolling Stone, do, 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 when Al Cooper played them on and did that's in there, and it kind of gets to what really happened. But if you remember the scene, he went in to play it, and the bass player had to turn the organ on for him to play it. The reality is even funnier. Okay?
What happened?
He shows up thinking he knew the producer, who was Tom Wilson, the African-American gentleman in the control room. Tom Wilson was a really great producer, produced like Velvet Underground and Dylan, blah, blah, blah. So he knew Al Wilson.
Okay.
He brings his guitar uninvited, thinking he's going to sneak onto this session for Dylan. And Cooper's told me this story. He tells it all the time, but he told it to me once. He goes in and plugs in his guitar and starts playing. In walks Mike Bloomfield, who Dylan introduced there. Reality, Bloomfield walks in with his guitar out of a rainstorm, water running off the guitar, and Cooper's like, who is this guy? He wipes the guitar off with a towel, plugs it in, and Cooper was like, picked up his guitar and walked back in the control room because he knew he was. And so what happened was Dylan moved the organ player to piano. And then Cooper figured out, hey, I could go out there and play the organ. I know enough chords, I can play the organ. But he got out there, and fortunately, it was left on, because he said he had no clue how to turn on an organ in order to play it. They left it on. He plays it, and in the movie, you see Chalamet kind of like made a face like,
yeah, he gave him a look.
What's he doing? In real life, they let it go to the playback, and Wilson just pulls it clear out of the mix, right? He wasn't supposed to be playing on there. Get it out of there. Dylan said, put that organ back in.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And that's how he ended up on the record and in the band for the Newport thing. And Dylan wanted him to keep playing with him as they toured. Freaked him out, freaked Cooper out. And he's like, nope, not doing that. And that's
wow.
Dylan ended up with the band as his backing band.
It's incredible.
Have you ever had a chance to talk to Bob?
I have met him on 3.5 occasions. Okay. All of them have been before shows except one. You don't really, I have never interviewed him. I have some friends who have, and when one of the, well, actually not the first time, but one of the times, it was, I was at the Lead Center in Kansas. He was playing a Lead Center in Kansas and then coming and playing a Lead Center here. And friend of mine, who the late great Bucky Baxter, was playing guitar with Bob then and pedal lap steel. And so he invited me to come down, go to catering, eat beforehand, whatever. And so we're sitting in there eating. And he said, if Dylan comes in, say nothing to him. Don't bother him. Don't do anything unless he comes over and talks to you. And he said, but he won't come in. So 10 minutes later, Dylan comes walking in, comes over and sits down next to us. And, who are you?
That's awesome.
And that, a 3-minute conversation or whatever, he got up and left, and Bucky went, that never happens.
That's awesome.
Kent, I'm curious, because you grew up in Western Nebraska, flyover country, as we call it. I'm curious, how did you learn of Dylan the first time?
Whoa, Blowing in the Wind when I was a little kid.
Okay.
Peter, Paul, and Mary, Blowing in the Wind would have been how I learned of Dylan, how I learned of Dylan as a first time I saw him, or first time of course you knew about him, but then, he had the motorcycle accident in 66, and really didn't tour or much for several years. And so the first time I saw him was in Fort Collins, Colorado on the Rolling Thunder tour, which was in like 1975, I think.
Okay. Because I was curious, it didn't cross over into the time he had already been electric by the time you found him or discovered him. Or
well, I mean, I'd heard Blowing in the Wind. I'd heard before he went electric, but when you're 6 years old,
yeah, it doesn't have the same.
It doesn't have that impact on you. Yeah, I was older than 6 9 when it happened.
Yeah. Why do you think he connected with you?
That's a really good question. I've never really thought that much about it. I think two things. Early on, it was just the songs that, I remember learning how to play Blowing in the Wind when I was one of the first songs I learned to play on a guitar when I was like 10, right?
Okay.
It's that kind of stuff. But it was then at the time once you started listening in the late 60s, early 70s, which was when it would have been more serious for me, more early 70s, it was, and that's exactly what Josh brought up. That 70s Dylan was really interesting, and he made some great records in the early 70s, and that's what did it. And then, some of us, once you get hooked, you get hooked. The reason I was in Tulsa for was that would have been 2023. They have a Bob Dylan conference down there every 2 years. And so I was down there, and some people that used to play with him talk, musicians, but it's panels about Bob Dylan and all this, and either you're on the bus or off, but boy, once you get on the bus, it's hard to get off. Yeah, I counted before we went on. I got 12 box sets over there.
Wow.
Including, this is the most recent. This is 20 discs of all the shows that he did, or that they managed to record on the 1974 tour with the band.
Wow.
Whoa.
I thought, Kent, and we mentioned it a little bit. I mean, Chalamet was great. I thought that Ed Norton was really, really good. And I mentioned that pod that I listened to earlier. Apparently he's a big Bob Dylan fan. And so they mentioned that, like, in there's an alternate universe where Edward Norton gets to play Bob Dylan at a younger point in his life, but obviously given the time that they focused on, he couldn't do that.
Right, too old.
I thought that both of the women in his life, if you will, I thought that both of those performances were excellent as well. And I even thought the Johnny Cash guy was good in the limited scenes that he had. I thought that he did a good job of kind of having that aura that Johnny Cash, had back then.
And remember Chalamet, Norton, and what's her name, Barbaro, that played Joan Baez, got Oscar nominated. None of them won, but they all got nominations. That ought to tell you something.
Yeah. And I thought Edward Norton was awesome. Like, this was a very, like, mature role for him, and I thought he nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
Nailed it, and he was very much like Pete Seeger. Like, what he was like in real life. Oh, by the way, if you want to watch the real Newport Film Festival, also the real when he did the TV show with Seeger, all that's out there on the World Wide Web to find. Sure, you can find Newport on YouTube. The other one, I can't remember for sure where I've seen it, but and they're accurate. It shows it's really well done.
I read on IMDb, so I hope this is true, that Ed Norton was one of the first cast members to reach out to Joan Baez just to try to get a read of what Pete Seeger was actually like, just with all the time they spent together.
Mm-hmm.
And then Edward Norton is like, oh, she's actually super open to talking about this. So then he told the other cast members, and I think a bunch of people just reached out to Joan Baez.
Really? Interesting. Yeah. That's cool.
Oh, yeah, I've talked to her about it.
Yeah.
At length, because when you're doing an interview with somebody about a show, like their show coming up, so what was Bob really like?
Tell me about the 60s.
Yeah. So it's interesting, as a fan, as you are, even though obviously there's some of the liberties that they take, and every movie does this, but the choice of this period, how it was done, this connected with you in a big way.
Absolutely. I saw it was, I think I had it number 3 on my best of the year list, 3 or 4, but I saw it twice in the theater when it was on its, when I reviewed it, then one other time, then when it came back for the Academy Awards, right? They always bring them back. I saw it then, and I've now watched it 3 times on streaming. So I guess I
guess you like it.
Ken, this is a Bob Dylan question more than the question about the movie. But when he started to go more electric, do you think he did that purely because he just kind of wanted to try it? Or do you think he felt pressured from like the Beatles and kind of saw the direction that music was going?
The answer to your question is
blowing in the wind.
No, the answer is he has said, I wanted to play with a band.
Okay.
Which makes more sense than, trying to read some great, I'm rebelling against the folk scene, or I'm, trying to match the Beatles. Remember, the Beatles were acolytes of him, not the other way around, right? I mean, the Beatles came to him. He is responsible for introducing, by legend anyway, the Beatles to the heathen devil weed marijuana.
Yeah, I was going to say Laszlo had that comment earlier. He gave the Beatles weed. Thank you, Bob.
I thought for a second you were going to say he gave the Beatles Yoko. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is a great guy after all.
I enjoyed it. As someone who I think Like a Rolling Stone is a great song, and I've listened to it, many, many times. I've never engaged with anything else from him. Watching the movie last night made me want to engage with more Bob Dylan stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was fun, and I thought it looked good too. It looked like it was shot on film, not digital, or did they just add a little kind of grain to it?
I don't know. I thought
it looked really good. It made me wish I would have seen it in theaters.
And boy, did it look period. It
really did. I thought they did an awesome job.
Well, they apparently recorded the music on period correct
equipment.
Yep.
By the way, that microphone at the festival, I've never seen one like that before. I thought with like a tight cloth that was around it, I thought that was a cool looking mic that they were singing into. Yeah, I love those old microphones.
Yeah, there's nothing here, at least on the wiki page.
I couldn't find anything either. Yeah,
what it was shot on.
It looked like it was film, but you could just add the grain in and post.